Sometimes ending our book can seem like it's the hardest part to do. How do we pull it together? How do we actually wrap this all up and bring it to a really strong close? Now, whether you're writing a memoir, whether you're writing a blog post, or whether you're writing an article, the answer is always the same. Hello, I'm Brenda and I love to help you to write your memoir. In this video, we're looking at the bookends of your memoir, your opening chapter and your closing chapter. Because the answer to the question of how do you wrap up your memoir, how do you bring that end chapter to a close, always lies in your first chapter. Remember too that our memoir is an argument, and so if it is an argument, we will have erased the argument in the first chapter. We would have expanded on and illustrated the argument throughout our story, and now in the final chapter we need to bring our argument to a close. And so therefore, as an argument, the opening chapter and the closing chapter need to work together. And I think that this has really been done well in the memoir Born a Crime by Trevor Noah. So let's have a look at it. In his opening chapter, Trevor Noah introduces the themes that are really important in his book. He introduces the themes of faith, religion, and church. He introduces the themes of violence, poverty. He discusses apartheid and introduces the conflicts and the challenges that are going to play out in his book. He also introduces the main characters, primarily he and his mother, the team against the world. He makes mention of his stepfather, Abel, which is a foreshadowing of the violence and the conflict and the challenges that are going to come later in the book. In the opening chapter, he launches into his story by actually talking about violence and talking about the faith of his mother. And he situates them both by using these words. It happened on a Sunday. I know it was on a Sunday because we were coming home from church. And every Sunday in my childhood meant church. We never missed church. So that is how he introduces the theme of violence as well as the theme of church and religion in his book. So now that we know the elements he's introduced in his first chapter, let's look at his last chapter and how these two chapters actually mirror each other. Now, in the last chapter of his book, he introduces the final violent scene of the book using very, very similar language. He says, "It was on a Sunday. I know it was on a Sunday because everyone else in the family had gone to church. And I, quite happily, had not." And so he uses the same terminology to actually accentuate the change that has happened for him. But it has that repetition, that technique of creating that sense of déjà vu, even if the reader doesn't actually go back to the opening chapter. And then it's a mechanism he uses in order to introduce the final violent act of this story. Now, the violence in the scene in the final chapter is a completely different violent scene. It has nothing to do with the first violent scene in the opening chapter. But the link between the two rests in that foreshadowing that he actually makes in his opening chapter, where he introduces his stepfather, Abel. And that foreshadowing plays out in the rest of his book and then culminates in this violent act by Abel in the final chapter. In the first violent act in the opening chapter, it's just his mother saving Trevor and her other young son from potential danger. She makes a decision and she tells Trevor, after she's thrown him out of a moving taxi, run. And in the final chapter, she steps in between the perpetrator Abel and the rest of her family in order to protect them. And she says to them, run. That word run is repeated in both chapters. So we have a setting where he's created the introduction to the violent scene by using that Sunday language. I know it was a Sunday because, And then he uses the same repetitive language when his mother says, run. Now you may be thinking, based on the evidence you provided so far, Brenda, is that really a strong argument of yours that the language is intentional? That actually it's mirroring the first chapter and the last chapter? Isn't just perhaps a little bit of a coincidence, or you're stretching it a little far? Perhaps if that was the only evidence, but I want to draw your attention to the final paragraph of the first chapter and the final paragraph of his closing chapter. It's a really good construct that has been used in writing this memoir in order to create a strong opening chapter and a strong closing chapter. So let's have a look at it. At the end of chapter 1, where he and his mother with his baby brother have fled for their lives and run for safety and found it at a gas station in the middle of the night, he turns to his mother and he makes a quip to her about her faith and her religion and the situation that it's got her in, and that he has certainly not appreciated this. And his mother's response is this. She broke out in a huge smile and started laughing. I started laughing too, and we stood there, this little boy and his mom, our arms and legs covered in blood and dirt, laughing together through the pain in the light of a petrol station on the side of the road in the middle of the night. Now, the ending of his last chapter, after the violence that has really put his mother in danger and has almost cost her her life, he now is in hospital with her where she is recovering. And again, there's this interaction between them, but this time his mother makes a comment that actually causes them to laugh. It's her turn to break the difficult situation that they're in with humor, which is how they've actually dealt with things in their life, with humor. And so she now cracks a joke. She says something that causes them to laugh. And listen to this language. She broke out in a huge smile and started laughing. Through my tears, I started laughing too. I was bawling my eyes out and laughing hysterically at the same time. We sat there, and she squeezed my hand, and we cracked each other up the way we always did, mother and son, laughing together through the pain in an intensive care recovery room on a bright and sunny and beautiful day. Do you see the repetition? Do you see the language that has been reused, that déjà vu sense at the end of chapter 1 and at the end of the final chapter that creates really strong bookends? And do you see themes that are actually repeated in this language? Let's take a closer look at it. First of all, the opening line of each paragraph is exactly the same, word for word. She broke out in a huge smile and started laughing. Then he starts laughing too, exactly the same language. I started laughing too. Yes, there's some other language added in there, which is perfectly fine. It's a different scene. It creates a different context. But the repetition of the language is really strong. In the opening chapter, we stood there. In the closing paragraph of the chapter, we sat there. This little boy and his mom, that togetherness, he and she against the world, is repeated in the final paragraph where he says, we cracked each other up the way we always did, mother and son. Laughing together through the pain, laughing together through the pain. But the context is different. At the end of the opening chapter, it is in the light of a petrol station on the side of the road. In the final chapter, it is in an intensive care recovery room. One ends in the middle of the night. The rest of the story is still to come. One ends on a bright and sunny and beautiful day. It's the end of the chapter. There's a word of hope. So you see how that has been constructed quite intentionally, I believe. And these are elements you can look at, you can think about when you're looking to Wrap up your story to give it a strong closure, regardless of what you're writing. Go back to that first chapter, that first paragraph of your article, your blog post, whatever piece of writing you're doing, and look at what is in that chapter that can be mirrored in your last chapter that will actually give you that strong bookend and bring it all together. Do get this book out if you haven't read it or you don't have it on your bookshelf. Go to your library, it's probably in the library, or get it on Amazon and have a look at how Trevor Noah has written his memoir. I hope that's been helpful to you. Do subscribe and click on the notification bell, and I will see you in my next video as we look at how to write our memoir.